precision policing versus away from some of these things. And so this will all be what they're going to say. But the department has 30 days to make a response and the changes. And they're working together. In fact, some of the stuff they got rid of last August. There are people in line out there, and I don't want to start over. I don't think today I can do switch to 1 minute on this one case. I think it's a long time to start.
There's the digital red light. Analog.
We want to make sure there's enough seats for the police.
Yeah.
Hey Otis, how you doing? How you doing, Adelaide? Huh?
Yeah. Today's the wrong day to bring this up, yeah. Morning, everyone. Today's Tuesday, March 12th, 2019, regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. There are some people outside that are that want to come inside, so we will take. We're going to start the meeting, but we will take their late cards if they want to speak, because that's what we'll do. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the records reflect Commissioners Sobroff, Decker, Bonner, and Goldsmith are present, and we have a quorum.
Agenda here. Okay. Item number 2A, the Inspector General's report relative to the review of selected department data-driven policing strategies as set forth.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Commissioners. Mark Smith, Inspector General. I'd like to start off just briefly with an introduction. Before you are Assistant Inspector General Camelia Naguib and Police Special Investigator Sam Colina, who were the project leads on this effort. In addition, I would need to give a huge thanks to a couple other staff members who are here, Police Performance Auditor John Grosdidier and Police Special Investigator Jonathan Oda. Just speaking really briefly about the rollout of this report, as has been mentioned by the Commission previously, we will present to you our report and our findings briefly today. There will then be a period of 2 weeks to receive public comment that will run through March 26th. And the public may issue comments and questions about the report to us in a variety of ways, primarily by email. There's been an email address set up for this purpose. I'll read it out now, but we'll make sure it's publicized as well. That email address is datadrivenpolicing@lapd.online. Data-driven policing is unbroken, all one word. Data-driven policing@lapd.online. We're also equipped to receive correspondence to our address, to our mailing address at 350 South Figueroa Street, Suite 1002, Los Angeles, California, 90071. After the 2-week period of public comment, we'll compile the results, and the board has asked us to come back on April 9th to present those results. And at that point, the Police Commission will choose any action it deems appropriate to take with regard to our report and our recommendations. So hopefully that answers just sort of the introductory questions about the rollout of the report. With regard to the report specifically and the contents of it, the Police Commission asked the Office of Inspector General to look at a number of different issues with regard to some data-driven policing strategies of LAPD. Some of these included a cost-benefit analysis, the impact that these programs have had on communities, how data is being stored, and what are the measures of success. Some of these questions lent themselves to a little more brief answers. For instance, the strict numerical dollar cost for a program like LASER. Our staff got in contact with the Fiscal Operations Division and learned that LASER is primarily funded through 2 grant funds in 2009 and 2014, totaling approximately just shy of $1 million. There are associated costs, however, with running some databases for LASER. It's estimated that the total cost runs roughly $1.8 million per year. By comparison, programs like PredPol come to the department at no hard cost. There are maybe some associated costs with it as well, but no annual strict costs. And with regard to Elucid, the department does not currently have any contracts, so there's no cost for that program either. Those are some of the easier, sort of simpler questions to answer. With regard to some of the more theoretical things, like, well, what benefit are these programs providing? How is their success measured? And what impact are they having on communities? The primary finding of our report, as you'll hear in just a moment from staff, is that these programs unfortunately lacked some consistency in how they're being used throughout the department, how data is being tracked across the department, and in theory, that is not necessarily in and of itself a problem. In other words, in trying to address crime, there can potentially be positive aspects to having different areas of the department tailor their approaches to crime, depending on what problems they're facing. However, what is crucial is that where that exists, there are measures to account for those differences when trying to draw systemic conclusions about the success of a program. And we didn't find that those differences were sufficiently accounted for. There was a lack of formalized protocols, meaning written directives about these programs, a lack of training on how to utilize these programs, particularly when personnel would hand off the usage of the programs from one to another. And those things made it challenging for us to draw solid, reliable conclusions about the success or the impacts of these programs. As you'll see, our recommendations focus on this overarching concern with the programs.
Please put the signs down as they block as they're blocking the cameras behind you, and they would like to be able to see also. You can hold, if you can hold them at your face level or something like that, that'll still be fine. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
So that's again a bit of an overarching view of what we found. For a lot more detail, what I'd like to do is have our staff first give you a brief description of what these programs are and how they work in practice, and then to run down what we found, the specific concerns that we highlighted, and what we recommend to the department going forward. And then we'll, of course, take questions that you have.
Mr. Smith, before you start that, will you talk a little bit about the process? This report, you've been working on this for how long? Have you talked to different parts of the department about different concerns you've had along the way? Has the department been collaborative? Have there been changes, or is this going to be everything changes at once? I noted that last August we stopped one of the programs. So you want to talk about what the process has been?
Sure, and you're correct. The one program in particular, after the commission had a public meeting on this topic last summer, that's what the recommendations for what the OIG should look at were born out of. Since that time, as you mentioned, in August, the department has ceased use of its chronic offender program. However, our report focused on what the program did when it was in effect. Okay. For some more specifics about exactly how we got to this place, I'd like to turn over to Investigator Sam Colina, who will answer some of the questions you just asked.
Okay, good. Morning, sir. Yeah, we will. We will. Are there people that they're not letting in? Yes. Okay. Yeah, if there's an empty seat next to you, if you can quietly raise your hand if there's an empty seat next to you. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Ready,
Go ahead, sir.
Commissioner?
Yeah.
Good morning, Commissioners, members of the department, and members of the community.
Make sure you speak in the mic because people are sort of
Sure.
buzzing.
My name is Samuel Colina, Special Investigator with the Office of the Inspector General. This morning, I'm going to provide you a brief overview of the data-driven programs the Commission had requested the OIG to review. This included Operation Laser, Predpol, and Elucid. The first program, LASER, which stands for the Los Angeles Strategic Extraction and Restoration Program, was created with the overall goal of reducing violent crime and gun-related incidents. LASER has two components.
So wait, let me just say something. I have every intention of all of you being able to stay and listen to this, to listen to this report. But if the meeting becomes disrupted and disruptive, we will adjourn to closed session, and you will have the ability to respond in writing, as the Inspector General said. If you'd like to speak, fill out a card. Even a late card is okay. If you'd like to speak during public comment, that's fine also. If you feel like you need to talk while other people are speaking, then I'd ask you not to, and not to disrupt the meeting. So let's give everybody the same courtesy that you're going to want when you're going to be up at the microphone, and then we'll be able to go through this. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir. So as I mentioned, LASER has two components, a location-based strategy referred to as laser zones, and a person-based strategy referred to as the Chronic Offender Program. The general concept behind the Chronic Offender Program was to identify persons who were committing violent crimes and to intervene with these persons while having minimal impact to the rest of the community. It is important to note, and as already mentioned this morning, that the department had suspended its Chronic Offender Program last August 2018 as a result of the special commission meeting on this topic that was held last July.
So it was suspended.
It was suspended, sir.
Okay.
The OIG opted to continue its review of the concept behind the Chronic Offender Program and any data that was collected prior to its suspension for the purposes of identifying issues or concerns that may have existed with that program, and to the extent the department continues a person-based strategy, make recommendations that would improve protocols and procedures. According to department materials our office received, chronic offenders were to be identified through a daily review of arrest and investigative results, and as well as field interview cards for anything related to violent crime and incidents that involved a gun. Once a person was flagged as a potential candidate, a crime analyst would conduct a workup on the individual, and this entailed a review and vetting process of the person's criminal history through the use of department systems. Points would then be assigned to the offender using a predefined set of criteria. Department personnel had expressed that the idea behind using the point system was to remove any potential for human bias during the identification of chronic offenders. The persons chosen were simply, they were picked based on the fact that they had the highest number of points after undergoing the workup process. The 12 people with the highest number of points are ultimately placed on a geographic area of list of offenders. This list is presented to the area captain, who would then assign field personnel to the offender for the purposes of conducting follow-up. These officers were to provide their captain a status update every 2 weeks. A bulletin which provides detailed information about a chronic offender is generated and distributed to field personnel. Given the possibility that a chronic offender may only be a person the division needs to be aware of, the template for the bulletin contains advisory language related to the person not being wanted for any crimes at this time. Chronic offender information, their status as far as being active or inactive, and any updates related to contacts with the offenders were to be entered into the chronic offender database. The other component of LASER is...
And that's been suspended.
Yes, sir, that's been
Okay.
suspended.
Okay.
The other component of LASER is its location-based strategy, referred to as laser zones. Laser zones are selected based on a historical analysis of crime data. An analyst reviews an interactive map that displays the location of violent crime incidents. Using a heat map layer, the analyst identifies locations with the highest density levels of violent crime and creates a box on a map. This box represents a potential laser zone. Laser zones are then presented to the area captain for approval. Once approved, direction is given to field personnel to identify locations within a laser zone that possibly have a nexus to the crimes that were committed there. These identified locations are then labeled as anchor points. When not occupied with radio calls, field officers are encouraged to spend time in laser zones and anchor points to provide high police visibility. The amount of time an officer spends in a laser zone is referred to as dosage. Dosage data is captured by a police vehicle's automated vehicle locator device, which automatically uploads data pertaining to how much time the vehicle is spending inside a zone. Reports comparing dosage and crime statistics can be viewed in the Palantir system. Updates related to any actions or activities that took place in any zones or anchor points are entered into the chronic offender database. In order to conduct a review of Operation Laser, the OIG requested and was provided all available materials regarding the operation of the laser program. We met with various department personnel, and we were given access to the chronic offender database and Palantir system. In order to determine how the laser program was being used at the area level, the OIG conducted site visits to 8 geographic areas and interviewed personnel there. With regard to PredPol, this was the second data-driven program.
Laser is still, laser is still in effect?
The laser zones are still in effect, sir.
And has laser been modified or during this process of your report?
We did have several meetings with the department, and they're currently under the process of revising the chronic offender program. I believe the department will speak to that later.
Good. Thank you, sir.
So the
Next,
second
PredPol?
PredPol was the second data-driven program we reviewed. PredPol is short for predictive policing. PredPol is another location-based strategy used by the department. However, unlike laser zones, which focus on violent crime, the primary objective of the PredPol program is to reduce vehicle-related crimes. It is important to note that although PredPol has been available department-wide since 2011, it is presented as an optional tool that area captains can use as part of their crime-fighting strategies. This became evident during our site visits at some areas who advised the OIG that they hardly use PredPol, and at another area that had only started using PredPol in the last 6 months. PredPol attempts to predict where and when crimes will most likely occur over the next 12 hours. The PredPol software uses an algorithm that analyzes 10 years of crime data, including the types of crime, their location, and the date and time. PredPol results are generated by the software's algorithm, and its data does not include any information about specific individuals. PredPol marks the location on a map with a red box. This red box represents a 500 square foot area designated as high risk. This red box is referred to as a PredPol hotspot. The PredPol system generates these reports on a daily basis, and it provides PredPol hotspots for each geographic area. Unlike laser zones, which remain stationary for at least 9 months, the PredPol hotspot boxes change on a daily basis. When not occupied with radio calls, patrol officers are given missions to respond to a PredPol hotspot to provide high police visibility. Similar to laser zones, the amount of time an officer spends in a hotspot is referred to as dosage. Dosage data is captured in the Palantir system and also in the PredPol system. In order to conduct a review of PredPol, as I already mentioned, we conducted site visits at 8 geographic areas, and we requested and were given access to the PredPol system and Palantir system. Lastly, The OIG was directed to conduct a review of Elucid.
Let's go back to Predpol. Predpol is still in existence?
Yes, sir.
Has Predpol been modified, or what discussions have you had with the department during this process?
They're still not, as far as I know, there's been no modifications to the Predpol program.
Thank you, sir. Okay.
Lastly, the OIG was directed to conduct a review of Elucid. The OIG has learned that the department has no prior or existing contracts with Elucid. However, the department has indicated that it may continue to explore such a relationship in the future. Without access to Elucid's data sets, the OIG did not examine this program further, but the following is provided as background information. Elucid is a company that pushes out survey questions via advertisements to a smartphone, tablet, or computer. Responses to basic survey questions form the basis of a sentiment score that ranges from 1 to 900, much like a credit score rating. Survey questions can be customized and may include open-ended questions, such as what is the number one issue in your neighborhood that you would like the police to deal with. This allows participants to provide a detailed response. Representatives from Elucid has told the OIG that the company does not collect any personal identifiable information. During its surveys, the participants are asked to share their age, gender, race, and if they live in the area where the survey is being completed. However, the participants are always given the option of submitting the surveys anonymously. The main objective of the Elucid program is to provide police departments with a real-time sentiment meter based on the survey results. Additionally, the program provides police departments with information about current community issues and community feedback. Based on the information received from the survey, police departments can develop strategies to improve community sentiment, and they can address current issues identified through community feedback. So if there's no more questions about these programs, I'd like to turn it over to Assistant Inspector General Camelia Naguib.
Go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners, and
Good
thank
morning.
you, Sam.
Thank you.
I'd like to start by providing a brief overview of our general findings in each area and then to talk about our recommendations. One of the major components of our review was a look at the chronic offender program, which you heard as part of Operation Laser. In order to get a sense of how the program was working, we reviewed the available data to get a sense of how many people were in the program, how they were being selected, and what kinds of activities were taking place. One of the data sources that we reviewed was a centralized chronic offender database, which was implemented in 2017. We found that as of August 2018, there were 637 people who'd been entered into the database, including 234 who were listed as active. The number of active chronic offenders per area ranged from 2 to 15. In looking more closely at the data and in talking to area personnel, we found that the chronic offender program has been fairly decentralized. As a result, we found significant variations and inconsistencies in how the chronic offender program was being administered from area to area. For example, some areas selected chronic offenders based on a history of property crime arrests rather than on violent crime arrests. Some areas used informal referrals or other selection methods rather than the designated chronic offender point system. Some areas distributed letters to people letting them know that they were on the chronic offender list, while other areas did not. And some areas modified the approved chronic offender bulletin format, removing in some cases the advisory provided by the city attorney's office or approved by the city attorney's office, and others did not publish bulletins at all. We also found that some areas did not retain copies of their chronic offender bulletins. We made it difficult for us to know what parameters were being used to designate the person as a chronic offender. As the Inspector General noted, there may be good reasons for an area to adapt the program in order to make it more relevant to that area's needs. These variations also raised a couple of concerns, however. First, some variations may have undercut principles or safeguards that were built into the program to protect people from unwarranted intrusions into their lives. These principles included, for example, a focus on only the most violent offenders, the use of an objective selection criteria, and the advisory language approved by the city attorney's office. Second, a lack of clear goals and parameters made it difficult to know what measures to use in evaluating the program, and it also made it difficult to know how effective the program was in meeting its goals. We also looked at what types of activities were being taken in relation to the chronic offender program and found that most people in the database appeared to have relatively few actual contacts with officers. In about half of the updates we reviewed, it was not clear whether the entry reflected activity that was driven by laser or whether the information has been gathered in some other way, such as a review of databases. This included, for example, updates that simply said that a person had been arrested or stopped, in some cases by a different jurisdiction, but did not indicate whether the stop or the arrest was due to laser activity. When we looked at the activities that were clearly driven by laser, we found that officers often did not actually locate or contact the person. This included, for example, attempts to conduct a probation or parole compliance check or to otherwise contact the person, as well as attempts to observe the person to see if they were involved in criminal activities. We also found that for some of the people in the database, about 30%, there were no listed updates at all. In general, we found that the available data made it difficult to assess the program's overall impact and effectiveness. To the extent that the department continues to deploy a person-based strategy, more rigorous parameters about the selection of people, as well as the tracking of data, would allow for better assessment of these issues. The chronic offender database also tracks information about anchor points, which, as you heard, are locations that are identified by each area as places that disproportionately contribute to violent crime in a particular laser zone. We found that each area had designated between 1 and 8 anchor points in the database. As with chronic offenders, we found that there was some variation in how anchor points were being selected, including some that were selected based on property crime and some that were not actually located in a laser zone. We also found that although there were many types of locations that served as anchor points, the biggest proportion of these were commercial or business locations. Based on the data provided, we also found that the officers generally appeared to be working in cooperation with the owners or managers of those businesses. The report describes the various types of activities that were being taken in anchor point locations, which included, for example, directed patrols, footbeats, or contacts with owners and managers. The database also describes some arrests that were made. But again, it was not clear whether those arrests were always the result of laser-driven activity or whether they had simply occurred and were tracked in the database. Clearer data about actions taken at anchor points, as well as the inclusion of outcome data, would assist us in assessing the impact of this program. The next thing we looked at was laser zones in general. We used the department's dashboards, laser dashboards, to analyze how much time officers were spending inside these zones and, to the extent possible, what activities they were conducting. This information, as Sam mentioned, is primarily captured by AVL or GPS devices inside each vehicle, which log when a vehicle is entering and exiting a pre-programmed laser zone. In looking at this automated data, we found that a large proportion, about half, of all laser hours were coded as not in service, which could mean that a vehicle is parked or is otherwise not in use. When we looked more closely, we found that 3 programmed laser zones had LAPD facilities inside them. As such, the not in service hours from those facilities, which were quite large, may skew the data and were removed from subsequent analysis. When we looked at other types of officer statuses that were coded inside laser zones, particularly those that reflect officer-initiated activity, we found that the average daily time spent in each laser zone was, on the whole, relatively minimal. We also looked at more laser zones more broadly to see if there was any apparent relationship between dosage and violent crime rates. We found that overall, an annual increase in dosage was correlated with decrease in violent crimes in laser zones. But when we tried to break this down by area and time period, the results were a bit more mixed. In mentioning this, I want to emphasize that there may be many other factors that impact crime rates and that we were not able to include in our very basic analysis. We did note, however, that most areas that saw significant increases in laser dosage also saw reductions in violent crimes. The final program we looked at was PredPol. As mentioned, this program provides each area with a list of hotspots on a daily basis where crime is predicted to occur. The program tracks dosage or officer presence in 2 primary ways. The first is similar to the laser program and tracks officers' presence in hotspots using GPS data. This information is tracked through the PredPol site. The second, which is tracked through the department's Palantir interface, relies on officers entering PredPol status codes in their vehicle's mobile terminals whenever they enter a PredPol location. In comparing these 2 sets of data, we found significant differences in the number of hours that was tracked by each system. Because the department is still exploring the best way to track this data, we did not conduct further analysis of the relationship between dosage and crime rates. We did, however, download 1 month's worth of GPS data to see how many hotspots there were and how many times they were being visited. The data showed that in that month period, there were approximately 1,300 unique PredPol locations that had been selected and visited during the month, for a total of about 1,300 hours spent. Overall, we found that about 2/3 of the locations had been visited 10 times or fewer during the month-long period, and that about 3/4 of visits lasted a minute or less. Based on the data, we determined that a majority of visits reflected officers driving through the hotspot, which provides officer visibility without necessarily a significant enforcement impact. We did note, however, that some locations received a large number of visits or had visits of long durations. We found that 2 of the highest volume locations actually encompassed LAPD facilities, while most of the others that had high volumes appeared to be busy intersections or high traffic locations such as shopping centers or DMVs. We did attempt to look more closely at a small number of PredPol visits to see what officers were doing, and those were visits over 10 hours. However, when we looked at the relevant logs, they did not appear to match the AVL data that we downloaded. Based on the information we had, we were not able to determine why that was the case. Overall, the available data appears to indicate that PredPol hotspots are distributed throughout the department and that the highest volume locations are business areas or LAPD facilities, rather than primarily residential areas. While most visits appeared short, there was a small proportion that were quite long. The collection of more precise data would assist in determining the overall impact of the program on the community. In the course of preparing this report, we met with the department on multiple occasions to discuss these programs and our findings. As we describe in the report, the department has already begun revising some of these programs, particularly its person-based strategy, to address some of the concerns that have been identified by the OIG and by the community. I will leave discussion of those changes to the department, but based on our findings, we have also developed a series of recommendations for your consideration in evaluating these programs. First, to the extent that the department continues to implement a person-based program to reduce crime, we recommend that it develop formal written guidelines to be approved by the commission. Those guidelines should clearly articulate the goals of the program and provide clear parameters related to how the program is to be run, including selection, disclosure, and removal processes. We also recommend that to the extent the program continues, the department modifies its database to capture information that allows for evaluation and auditing of the program, and specify a retention policy for any related documents such as bulletins. Other recommendations have to do with creating an oversight and audit mechanism, as well as a consistent process for training personnel. Second, with respect to its location-based programs, we recommend that the department establish, again, formal written guidelines that specify how laser zones and anchor points are to be selected and reviewed, and what strategies can be taken at these locations. We also recommend that the department ensure that laser zones and PredPol locations do not encompass LAP facilities, as this may skew the data, and that it reconcile and address inconsistent data sets to ensure that dosage amounts are captured accurately. Finally, with respect to all of the programs discussed, we recommend that the department develop a system for the regular reporting of usage and outcome data to the commission and the public, and that it obtain feedback before implementing any new or revised programs. We also recommend that it look for opportunities to obtain independent evaluations of the efficacy and impact of each data-driven policing program where possible. And with that, I can answer any questions that you might have.
Okay.
Thanks.
Before commissioner questions, I'd like to ask the chief to comment on process, your involvement in the process, your direction during the process, and where we are. Chief?
Good morning, commissioners and Secretary General, as well as members of the public, and thank you for the for this presentation today. A couple of remarks I would do to frame this. First, I'd thank the Inspector General as well as his staff and their work with us in evaluating these programs. I also want to thank and support then Commissioner Cynthia McLean-Hill and her request that really started this process of taking a formal detailed evaluation of both PredPol, laser, as well as our efforts with community surveys, which is obviously, well, I'll let her speak to its influence by members of the community, but we certainly heard the community's interest in this well. The last July, as this meeting was held by the Commission and the Board of Public Works room, I remember clearly the conversation and the concerns identified, And we were aware of also of those concerns because the previous year and a half, we had been looking at laser, PredPol, particularly those two programs as data-driven pilot efforts, and evaluating them as pilots as whether or not they were proving effective and were they achieving results. If they were, what were they? If they weren't, what might be influencing that? How was their application? As a assistant chief over operations in my weekly ComStat inspections, we frequently ask questions about chronic offenders. We frequently ask questions about the laser zones themselves, the application of PredPol, and through our time, which is available, those all taped interviews, if you will, those inspections, we began making step-by-step adjustments. And I think that your report was reflective of that. I'm drawn to the agenda item in October of 17, talking about amendments to what makes up a chronic offender score list because of, again, observations by members of the public as well as internal, the department and Inspector General, that matters such as an FI stop may be unduly influencing a chronic offenders being identified. So I'm thankful that this report has come today. Fundamentally, I believe that data-driven strategies improve policing, and that improves community safety. What's critical in that is that we recognize the systems have to be thoughtful, and they have to recognize there's a limit of what data can be done. And in an organization our size, that as we apply pilot programs and we attempt our new and our effort to continually improve and innovate, is that we recognize in those applications that we're willing to adapt them to local conditions. Violent crime in Los Angeles is unfortunately, in reality, not evenly distributed across a city of this size. And as is the nature of crime as it evolves across a city as its representation, I believe our strategies have to also similarly adapt, and programs such as laser or PredPol need to be responsive to the needs at a local level, whether that be identifying a place-based strategy or it be a person-based strategy. How do we identify that based in part on the local commands in which we're involved in, which may account for some of these changes that you see here. As we've evolved over time and we've evolved this program, though, we recognize a certain critical mass this past year of criticism that we needed to stop the offender aspect of this relative to the chronic offender bulletin. There just was uniformly, in my view, just too many inconsistencies, raising too many concerns relative to civil rights advocates and members of the community, that to let that continue unabated was countering the very public trust. And so that's why we stopped that. And since that time...
Chief, excuse me for a second. I promise you, when you're speaking, that the chief nor the commission will interrupt you. And I'm also going to promise you that you are not going to interrupt the chief, or we'll just go into closed session. So if you want to have an opportunity to speak, then give other people an opportunity to speak. Go ahead, Chief.
I'm almost done. So I want to say in closing that the recommendations that have been proffered in this report we support fully, including the recommendation that this commission, as well as members of the public, have time and can comment and influence the evolution of where PredPol and laser moves into. As we move into the continued data-driven strategy in our community policing efforts to build trust by the application of how we go about policing in the city, it's critical to me that this commission be aware and supportive and influence the design of that, as well as members of the public. And I look forward to the coming weeks that we have an opportunity to engage in that dialogue back and forth. From that, it's meant, and I believe will, build confidence. There will be, however, differences, and I expect those differences. There are advocates who believe that a person-based strategy, whether that person be an offender or that person be a victim of a crime, that those person-based strategies can be unconstitutional, they can be racially motivated or influenced, and my commitment is to try to address those concerns as best possible while still watching and paying close attention to the research, the academia that talks to the merits of such programs in the application of a finite number of police resources. So I'll close with those remarks and look forward to your comments.
Okay.
Conversation.
Let's have any commissioner comments or questions, knowing that we have also a period of time, a couple of weeks, to also to go deeper, to submit written requests, just like the public does. But let's start with Vice President. Go ahead. Oh, Shane.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So first, I just want to thank the members of the community who have been raising these issues for a long time and who participated actively in the hearing that resulted in this report, and have raised concerns and issues that the Inspector General has sought to address, and especially appreciate Camelia and Sam and Mark at the Inspector General's office for all that you've done to dig so deeply into each of these programs and do as thorough analysis as possible under the circumstances. And I really appreciate the department as well and everything you just said, Chief, in taking this all so seriously and proactively, taking it seriously from the beginning, not waiting for an Inspector General report, but, being so concerned about the impact on trust and evaluating these programs independently, as well as participating in the Inspector General's analysis and already beginning to make changes as a result of that. I think what's critically important when there are so many questions and concerns raised about these programs is that there be transparency, that the programs come out into the daylight, and that as much information as that we can obtain is presented to the public and shared with the public for your response and your review. And I'm very glad that we have this 2-week period to get public response, and look forward to hearing from members of the community about your concerns and questions about what you've heard. And I think just that is so important to building public trust, as you said. And I think, the commission will be responsive to what we hear from the community. So I appreciate the recommendations. I again, will continue to consider them and hear other responses from the public, and I look forward to the department's more thorough presentation on your plans for the future. I think, it's disappointing that there is not sufficient data and analysis for us to draw the kinds of conclusions that we'd like to be able to draw, particularly from policing strategies that proclaim themselves to be data-driven. It's disappointing to not see the consistent implementation and data collection, analysis of data that would help us draw conclusions. So I think, we just need to focus on going forward and the changes that the department's going to make to these programs, or the new programs that you're going to create under the precision policing rubric. And, just look forward to the discussion about applying what analysis has happened to the existing programs going forward. So in particular, making sure that there is criteria for adoption of programs and for evaluation of programs, so that we can determine the effectiveness of these programs and any disparate impact or specific impact on communities, in particular any person-based programs, which do have some greater risks in terms of impact and bias. And with that, I'll turn it over to the rest of the commission.
Okay, Vice President Decker, Commissioner.
Yes, Mr. President, can you clarify for me, when are we hearing from the department about their steps moving forward? Is that at a subsequent meeting?
Yes, I believe on the 9th. Is that correct, Chief?
Mr. President, yes, that is correct. Though the process will be, we'll have the open public comment period for 2 weeks from today. In the meantime, the department will be preparing their response to this report, along with recommendations that they will make to the commission of how they would want to go forward with a new or revised program. And also on the April 9th date, the Inspector General will report back a summary of the public comments that their office has received over that 2-week period of time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome,
ma'am. Well, then for the Inspector General, as I read the report and sometimes the lack of information that you were able to get to assess the situation as fully as I think we all had hoped, were you able to determine how often these programs are used? And why I say that is because I'm mindful that the department, the number of 911 calls has increased exponentially in the last few years, and obviously that's a priority. What I wasn't able to grasp is how either embedded these programs are in the different divisions, and whether, I certainly got the sense sometimes they weren't being used at all, but I didn't get a sense of how often they're actually being used. And I'm wondering if you are able to clarify that for me.
I think it was a little bit difficult to know whether because it's used automated data for much of what we looked at. It's difficult to know whether officers were in the area because they went there because of laser or whether they were just there. These tend to be already high crime areas, and so it was hard to know what the goal was in going there. We did note that the PredPol system has a system for officers to log in their status when they go into a PredPol zone, which is a more deliberate process. But when we compare that to the automated data, sometimes it was higher than the automated data. In other cases, it was lower. So it looked in some cases as though there was some deliberate effort by officers in some divisions, particularly the Valley areas, to use PredPol, where it was less so in South Bureau, for example. I would also just add that laser zones are often part of a larger mission, and so I think that is often how officers are assigned to those areas. And if the department will correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Okay. Chief, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I would just comment that Laser Zone was the pilot effort that expanded across the organization, was primarily meant and originally designed for violent crime, particularly gun violence. And the PredPol its origin is primarily designed for property crime. And I do believe as you see the implementation over the course of a number of years here, that those areas that had high levels of property crime generally implemented PredPol to a much greater degree. In contrast, those with laser stuck with the laser zones and the attributes of that program, and PredPol was less significantly as an influence. That's just from a ComStat, from an organizational operational perspective. That's how those two different tools, similar in the sense that they have place-based characteristics, were applied differently, influenced by the area, by the characteristics of the area.
Right, and I understand that, and I just don't still have a sense of within different areas, particularly given the number and the increase in 911 calls, how some of these more discretionary programs, how much of the department's effort can really be put into it or has been put into it.
So one of the challenges, Commissioner, that we had during this period, and we still have it, is capturing dosage because of our system limitations. What that means is physically, whether an officer is in an area because of a directed patrol, PredPol, because of a response to a radio call, or happenstance, that occasion we're trying to capture as a presence. The systems have evolved over the last 4 years as to how that process was captured. It was initially captured manually, and then it was transitioned to a button that you would press on your computer inside the car, and then we used auto vehicle locator systems that our vehicles have as a means of capturing as well. So it hasn't been a static process. Rather, it's been an effort of the organization really to try to improve the capture of that information so that we could better assess both its impact but also its compliance. Are officers in areas actually using these strategies, or are they just giving lip service to it? And that's where we were. This has been a state of evolution, and frankly, it's also in candor been one that has been made on the fly without funding, without necessary support, and it has been experimentation. It is an effort to look at resources.
All right. Thank you, Chief. I do have I do have a number of questions for the department, but I think they're better held to when we hear from the department in the subsequent meeting, because I do want to hear from the community today. But I will say that the department has a history of being very effective in using data to support its programs, and in the absence of that, and in the absence of effective procedures to either audit, as the IG's office says, or to demonstrate to the community why programs are effective and not having adverse impacts that they might suspect, or for the department to discover that they do have adverse impacts that you didn't intended. It's important before implementing the programs to have the infrastructure in place to determine their effectiveness and to be able to answer community questions. So I understand the department is constantly challenged with how to use its resources to address crime. And I'm very sympathetic to that effort of using resources to the most effective way possible. but at the same time, we have to ensure the community understands the programs and supports them, and that we have the data to show that. And I think what the IG's report says is we're lacking in that data, and to move forward, we have to have an infrastructure in place to ensure that we bring everyone along with us the best that we can. But with that, I'm going to hold the rest of my questions for the subsequent presentations. Did you have any? It's not today.
Okay, Commissioner Bonner.
Yeah, I'm still a little bit understanding, the process. So if there's questions that I'm asking of you that are addressed by the department, that's fine. But I'll just get them on the record. And I'm going to go first. I have a set of questions that just go through the report itself. So just going page by page, and then I had a separate set of some things I jotted down. So forgive me if I jump around a little bit. Also, I'm still kind of going through and reflecting, so in many cases it may be just a matter of pointing me to an area of the report that I should read and find the answer to a question. So I'm going to go first to page 4, and this is really just on the broad topic of laser itself, that's explaining the premise of the is to target with laser-like precision and so on and so forth. I didn't see a recommendation relative to changing just the name of the program and dropping that entire framework. And I'm assuming also just the term dosage itself is an effort to kind of continue that theme, that medical analogy theme. Is that correct?
Certainly that was a concern that we have discussed. I believe the department may be considering changing the name, but I can't speak to that. I think certainly the cancer terminology was a concern.
Okay. I'm going to page 7. This is under the heading of strategies for intervention, and there's a discussion there at the end of the second paragraph about personnel who are assigned an offender are to provide a status update to their commanding officer every 2 weeks regarding the actions that have been taken. Did the review and the audit, the work that you did you look at really how often this really happens, and as a practical matter, are people really complying with this, and how it's documented and so on and so forth?
So we looked at the database to see what kinds of entries were made, and in most cases, the entries were relatively minimal. We didn't look at the frequency per se, but as you can see in the chart, I think later on in the document, there were quite a few that didn't have any entries and some that only had 1 or 2. So it didn't appear that they were making regular updates to the database, but we didn't, and there were some that had a lot.
Well, I'm also not just asking about the database, but about what the record showed relative to personnel who were working in this area actually interfacing with the commanding officers, and how engaged they are, and whether they're really on top of the records and so on.
So I think the way it was structured for most of the areas we visited is each area has a crime intelligence detail. And so for some areas, the field personnel would provide updates to the CID. CID would in turn provide the information they received from field personnel to their captains. So there was not a formal process of the field personnel going directly to the captains to provide updates.
And did I understand you also saying that it was kind of different in different areas?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Also, on at the bottom of that same page, there's a statement to the effect that the laser zone maps for each area are presented to the respective commanding officer, who has the discretion to either reject, accept, or modify the size of the identified laser zones. Did your review, I don't know if this is unfettered discretion, I'm assuming that it is, but did your review look at any the incidents in which the commanding officer exercised this discretion, and with what effect, and so on?
Yes, sir. For some commands, the only modifications they made was changing the size of the laser zone, either expanding it or shrinking it. So captains are very familiar with the types of crime that occur in their divisions. And so when they look at the laser zone maps, I think the general response was they agreed that these were their problematic locations. But as far as making any modifications, It was just changing the size of the laser zone. It wasn't choosing new locations.
And did you capture any information as to where there were any greater modifications made, like where there any, the captains were making, I'm saying by bureau or division or?
Well, we did have one particular area where after they conducted their annual reevaluation of the zones where they had positive results, meaning there was a great reduction in violent crime. So for that particular area, they actually they deactivated that zone and moved it to a different location.
No, what I'm asking is, were you able to discern whether this discretion was exercised any more vigorously, say, in South Bureau versus in Valley or any particular?
Well, we only visited 2 areas per bureau, so I can't give you the answer department-wide. But as far as modifications that were made, this happened in West Bureau.
Okay, I'm going to page 22, please. And this is just on 22 and 23. I'm just wanting to make sure I'm reading this correctly, that there's a lot of, I presume that if we were just talking, one thing I presume you're telling us through the long report is that there's a lot of questions really about how much impact these programs are having. So it's not necessarily showing that it's a mixed bag. Some cases there's some evidence of effect, positive effect. Some cases it's less clear. Right? Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And I would also add that, these systems were primarily designed as tracking systems and not necessarily to produce outcome data. And so a lot of the data that we looked at was people logging what they had done, but there wasn't necessarily a way for us to determine what was the result of that or whether those were even laser-driven activities. So that's one thing that we recommend kind of be improved in the data so that we can actually determine you tried this and this was the result.
And even though it's, I'm just going on to the conclusions and so on, that it's a data-driven program, so to speak, but one of the 2 key barriers that were identified is one is either a lack of data or bad data. That's the other is that there's inconsistent use of the data and implementation of the programs. Is that accurate? Okay.
That's accurate.
I'm going down now to the recommendations, I think. And one question that I had here about, and this is in number 6, this is on page 33, under the heading of modify the offender database, and I don't know why this is only relative to this program, but it's the last bullet item there about the oversight and the audit structure. And one concern, at least, that I have about audits is you guys are doing great work, but an audit is a lagging indicator, right? I mean, you're just looking at things that have already happened, so mistakes that have been made and things that have happened incorrectly. It's helpful to have them pointed out, but it's not real-time correction and effective management and implementation, right? So one question I have there really is why is the recommendation to develop an oversight and audit structure? Why is that only relative to this one subcategory of the offender database?
I think this was attached to the chronic offender program because that was the greatest concern for us in terms of inconsistencies and the potential impact of those inconsistencies on people's civil rights, et cetera. And so that was a concern that we really wanted to highlight. And one of the things that we noticed that there was a lot of decentralization, informal practices, et cetera. And so we wanted to centralize that. In terms of the more data-based programs where there's less data and it tends to be more automated, I think having a process which we talk about under reporting and evaluation, where the department really looks at its data more closely and tries to determine what outcomes are there, what potential anomalies are there. I think that's what we wanted to address those issues. But to the extent that it focuses on particular people, particular places, I think that's where we really want to see more oversight than what we did see.
So on the same topic, one of the things that I'm still struggling with is, other than the chief, of course, who in the department is responsible for the oversight, the performance, the accountability of the programs in terms of your review. So you have the chief, a lot of people in the chain of command, but where is the ongoing day-to-day management of these programs?
Well, as I think we talk about in the report, it tends to be fairly decentralized. And so that, I think, again, is one of the reasons we talk about centralizing that process.
And Commissioner, if I could add on, just in our meetings with the department, sort of informally, that was one particular area that they specifically agreed with and said we had always wanted to, but didn't have the chance to centralize these things for that exact purpose. Getting back really briefly to your previous question, I think you're exactly right that the sort of auditing and oversight function needs to be present with regard to all these programs. As Camelia mentioned, though, specifically with regard to that chronic offender database, it was where we found some of the more sort of glaring data issues, and so we I think tended to highlight it a little bit more in the recommendations. Just to give one example, it's a repeat of what's been said already, that within the database that is really meant to be a point-based system, there's a substantial number of entries in there that had 0 points. It was clear that it's just not being used or controlled or audited correctly, and so we kind of highlighted that a little bit more, that recommendation, but we don't disagree. In the other recommendations, although we didn't necessarily use the same exact language, for location-based, for instance, in number 3, reconciling the data is still a recommendation of ours. We certainly wouldn't want to take away from the auditing oversight function that needs to happen with all these programs.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think when the department is making their presentation on reports, we'll talk a little bit more. I'll still want to understand how much of this is just relying on a fragmented, decentralized management of the programs versus some more centralized, focused, dedicated management is what I want to understand. Did your review or your report? You maybe looked only internally. I presume that department. One question is are there any recognized best practices that have been identified or documented anywhere with any other national programs, or was that beyond the scope of what you were looking at?
To say briefly, it was beyond the scope of what we were looking at, so we did not spend time doing a comparative analysis. We do that, and some other reports did not do so for this one.
Hopefully, and just for the chief and the department, is there'd be some comment on that, maybe when the department, if they have a comment today, but if not, at least when you come back with the report, maybe prepare to talk about how what we're doing here compares to potentially other best practices that have been acknowledged elsewhere.
Absolutely. The time we spent in the last 9 months has included looking at the field of work, both in practical sense, what's actually being done in other agencies, as well as what does academia show us as research results on person-based strategies, place-based strategies, and we'll have in our response back to you information relative to that. It is not, just as this, there are data gaps, there are challenges in formally assessing all these programs. I've yet to see a research that comes back and says we have all the answers, we see all the data points we need to make an absolute conclusion. There's always going to be shortages. I suspect that when we come back to you, though, we're going to bring what we know, what we have higher confidence in, and other areas that we're still in debate.
Okay, thank you. And when I have just two final points. One is when the department comes back also, I didn't see, and maybe if there's something in here on this, you can point me to it, but the overarching question about the risk of bias and unequal treatment and implementation, I didn't see that drawn out in terms of a specific look at that or what we may have found in that regard. So I'm curious to know what additional work is or can be done. Yeah, what I see is if not the most fundamental issue.
To me, I think the closest we came to that important question was to really look again at the Chronic Offender Bulletin program, which was, I think, pretty clearly one of the greatest concern for us. In looking at that, we did a breakdown and compared it with all the arrests for violent Part 1 crimes over the last some 6-year period by the department, and broke it down by ethnicity and racial makeup. What we found roughly was that the ethnicities of those arrests tracked what was in the database, so the database wasn't specifically doing anything different than the department was otherwise doing. However, that still suffered from a number of the same sort of data problems that we found with these programs in general, that we felt like we couldn't really draw a distinct conclusion about that to say that this is neutral or it's not neutral, is harmful or is not harmful, and so we weren't able to draw sort of stronger conclusions. But that's kind of the closest comparison we made. It was weighted more heavily, as you see in the report, the chronic offender database weighted more heavily towards males and against females as compared to the arrests by the department, but that was the main difference difference that we saw. And I'll ask if Ms. Naguib has anything to add.
Well, oh, yeah, correct.
I just wanted to add specifically with the chronic offender bulletins in particular, I think the existence of discretion, which we did find across different areas, particularly where we just received, informal referrals that weren't documented, what was the basis, those were a big concern for us in terms of the introduction of bias of any kind into the program. The use of gang identification, the use of field interviews, those also could be driven by police activity and so I think the department is aware of that and looking at how we can reduce those potential ways to introduce bias.
Is there a recommendation on that, by the way? I didn't see that also directly addressed in the list of recommendations.
About removing those two categories?
Yeah, yeah.
I think the department's already in the process of removing those, and so that was why we didn't make a recommendation, but I think we support that.
So let me just ask, when you come back with the department's input, if you could have someone speak directly to, and not, the past and the data that's presented, it kind of is what it is. The key question that I'm asking really is what either is being done or can be done on a going forward basis to make sure that issue is given ongoing and sustained attention as to how to make sure we're rooting out or avoiding the risk of bias in the programs.
I believe, and again, we'll look forward to this report, the public feedback for the next 2 weeks, and as our response, but we will address. We've already taken steps to ensure that the grading, if you will, the quantitative and qualitative nature of identifying an offender takes into consideration how bias or unsubstantiated or merely suspicion could influence an identification of an individual. Versus being on a person who's been previously arrested, convicted, placed on probation or parole as being a matter that courts have reviewed and found being the other, if you will, more weighty evidence of whether or not this person may or may not be subject to continuing to offend.
And thank you very much. I'll look forward to the.
And I would add, we took note of notifying those individuals more regularly in a sense of systematically across the city, allowing them to appeal and approach to understand why they would be identified, and resources for them, and helps and efforts that they would not reoffend, and instead provide them resources and access to jobs, housing, treatment programs that would, in hopes, identify them to avoid future acts.
And also, just to be clear, make sure you're clear in terms of what I'm asking and looking for, is to, on the one element is to have some criteria and the kinds of measures that you're describing. Also, what I'm looking for is, how do we know, other than the periodic audit and looking back after the fact and when damage is done, when we may then either have a mixed bag or draw some conclusions that maybe has been bias or there's bias, how can we, on an ongoing, consistent, sustained basis, have the accountability along the way, on a day-to-day basis for somebody's watching and managing the programs in a way to eliminate the risk, or at least reduce the risk of bias, as opposed to reporting it and finding it after the fact in data.
So I believe that our efforts, when we come back and report where within the organization the evolution of these programs of data-driven strategies will be housed, within what command, and what the structure will be to inspect and provide training and written guidelines and circle back to see how it's being implemented and what the results are, and I believe that loop will identify that.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly responsive to other ideas the Commission might have to achieve that.
The final question or question and a half that I have, still, and this could go to either the IG or the Chief. In terms of the primary goal and use of the programs, is it arrest or deterrence?
We found that was, frankly, another one of the sort of many inconsistencies with these programs. The goals seem to shift in some manner. I think they may have started out with arrest and then have moved, more towards sort of prevention. However, we think that's one of the things that needs to be more clearly communicated to the people who are involved in using the programs, and more clearly delineated in written procedures so that everyone's clear on those goals. If I can back up just one brief second to the important question you were asking before about having controls in place to make sure that bias is not creeping into this process. One of the recommendations that we do have, it's a general one, I understand, but it's one that's been referenced by the chief previously as far as looking at academics out there and deciding what's appropriate as far as these strategies, is to look for opportunities to obtain independent analysis of these programs. Analysis by folks that are not connected to any measure of the program that can come in and look for exactly what you were concerned about. That's one thing that we certainly encourage the department to do, and we did recommend. And I want to see if Kimberly has any thoughts on the other on the goals of the program or anything.
I would just say that's something we highlighted in the report that really needs to be sort of clarified.
So, and that is obviously in the Inspector General's office unable to determine that uniformly. Prevention has been and will be and will continue to be the goal. Preventing violent crime, preventing property crime, building trust in communities by an absence of crime. That is the definition of the success of the Los Angeles Police Department in each of our communities. It is not the arrest. However, that is when you are unable to prevent a crime through a presence or through strategies to improve the safety and resilience of an area to avoid violent crime and property crime. There is an absolute role in identifying those responsible and bringing them to the justice system. And a means of doing that through data is also a proven reality of a necessity. There's finite resources. We know that we have individuals who prey upon communities through a variety of strategies, and their efforts are oftentimes driven by challenges that are well beyond the police control. But nonetheless, we have a responsibility to identify those individuals and constitutionally and bring them to the justice system to improve the safety of a community.
Thank you. I will save the balance of the questions for the department's presentation. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move to comments on the report.
We have 30 public comment cards.
Okay.
The first four, the Red Chief Hunt, Jamie Garcia, General Dogon, and Tiff Guerra.
Okay. Morning, sir.
Good morning, the Red Chief Hunt. I'd just like to know if I'm on the chronic defenders list. After being arrested 86 times, my only defense was in federal court. And I want to go back to my last two arrests. It was November 10th to 15th right here, and then December the 15th over in 2016. And my only defense was the federal courts, and they came back and just ruled in my favor and things like that, said the rest was illegal and unconstitutional and uncivil. Here's what I really want to see. Now, we know that there's a really big problem. I haven't heard no really good solutions. And database driven policing and things like that. Seems like the public know more about that than you guys officers and things like that. I just really want to speak the truth. Michael Moore said when he first came into office that there's no more us against them, it's only us. I want to see that theory, and that's kind of hard to believe because I never see nobody working with the independent investigation people. Now, if that was Andre Barak, it would be a little bit different. Unfortunately, he moved on. But I mean, as somebody that's been arrested 86 times, you know, and if you go to the birdseed arrest and you see that on YouTube, you would understand the issues and the problems and things like that. But you know, I think that you guys should really involve these guys and have a round table and sit down with the independent commissioner or whoever he is, the inspector general, and get it done right. It's not nothing like having things done right. I think I'm a chronic defender, and I think that the federal courts have came back and said 30 times that you guys have arrested me unconstitutionally and uncivil. So, you know, I'm just taking it from my experience, so I hope you guys do too.
Thank you, sir.
The Red Chief Hunt.
So I want to start by reframing how this whole process started. People up here are trying to take responsibility. They're trying to say it was because of them that this has happened, but this started by suing you. Started by suing the LAPD because you refused to turn over information about Operation Laser. That is where this started. Then we released our report in May of 2018. Turning to you now, Inspector General, I remember us specifically asking you to audit this program. And you know what he told us? Well, I don't know if I can get to it. So that is where you saw the community at this point. So then what did we do? We forced you into a hearing. And in that hearing, at least there was the telling of the Inspector General to audit this program. And so now we are here. So we claim that, and we also claim the victory. We also claim the moment of stopping the LAPD from using the chronic offender program. We stopped the LAPD from using that program. We, the community, stopped you. That is our power. That is why we are here. So I want to talk about the fact that this program has been going on for 10 years. In 2009 is when you started to experiment on the community. So let's get to the points that we're not appreciating, the points that we're not uplifting, that all identified chronic offenders had, or more than half of them had no violent crime. 100 had 0 points. Officers were creating reasonable suspicion. Then was little to no data discussing how officers engaged with chronic offenders. But the OIG and the Commission seems to be completely unconcerned with the violation of human rights. It's as if we're statistically insignificant. How can you talk about reform when lives have been assaulted, when lives have been affected, but yet you just move right into reform? How can you do this?
Next speaker, please.
General Dogan, please.
Morning, sir.
General Dogon, LA Can Stop LAPD Spying. After the community forced the Board of Police Commissioners to host a hearing on data system policing on Operation Laser, the PredPol in July 2018, the commission not only forced the IG to audit the program, but failed to announce to the community that LAPD suspended the chronic offender program in August of 2018. The information was kept from the community to attempt to vitalize our power and strength. Dismantle the entire program and abolish the policing right now. Yeah.
Next speaker.
So something I'm going to talk about is what is going on in laser zones, because for all the discussion of tracking and protocols and data or lack of data, there was very little discussion of impact, right? And that is the real question, is what is the impact of these programs? And what is the impact on families? LAPD will tell you that the impact of data-driven programs is minimal because they're only going after the bad guys in bad locations. The OIG will tell you that the impact is unknown, or they'll downplay that impact by saying things like, looking at chronic offender records, there's just one instance where use of force against that person by LAPD appeared to be tied to Operation Laser, to which we say, we're not fucking surprised to hear that. Because this is the same department that since 2011 has been unable to find any racism in over 3,200 reports of biased policing filed by the community, mostly filed by the black community, against LAPD officers. And here's what else we know. We know that the following people have been murdered by LAPD officers engaging in crime suppression details specifically in 2016 after Operation Laser was expanded. We know that Pablo Cartagena, a 23-year-old Latino man, was killed by a Metro officer engaging in crime suppression in a high crime area. Ryan Joseph, a 20-year-old black youth, was killed by a Metro officer in a known gang area. Carnell Snell, 18-year-old black youth, killed by a Metro officer assigned to crime suppression. Richard Risher, 18-year-old black youth, chased and murdered by gang enforcement officers inside a laser zone. Keith Bursey, 31 years old, black male, killed in a laser zone on a so-called hood day, which his mission sheet from LAPD would have called out, sending officers into that area on that day. Jesse Romero, 14 years old, Latino youth, killed by a gang enforcement officer inside a laser zone. Kenny Watkins, 18 years old, black youth, killed by an officer assigned to CSOC on a crime suppression detail. Every one of these killings happened in 2016 after Operation Laser was expanded.
And we are not saying that any of these people were in the chronic offender database, but they were in the area on that day, and they fit the profile of who LAPD was looking for.
Next speaker, please.
The next four speakers. The next four speakers, Courtney Eccles, Sarah Hamid, Todd C., and Adam Smith.
Okay. Morning.
So the story of data-driven policing, right? It's not just a story about the emergence of this ostensibly new mode of practice, nor is it simply a story about the collusion between police, academia, and profit-driven private companies, nor the capitalist system in which this collusion occurs. But it's also a story about who has the power to produce knowledge, a story about how the racialized other is created and then targeted for dispossession and death. It's a story about colonization, exclusion, and access to space. It's a story about how policing has become even deadlier, its power and control further intensified, its practices even more invasive. It's a story about the sanitation of racism, the deepening of cumulative disadvantages, and the further invisibilization of state-organized racial violence. And so, for example, when we look more closely at these programs, we see, in fact, that one of the functions of data-driven policing programs is to reconfigure the removal and the eradication of people and the seizure of property and land as a rational and logical response to the police-constructed threat of crime. And so, for example, when we see, like under Project Tough, the city abated 3 apartment buildings, of which the Community Redevelopment Agency for the City of Los Angeles, they purchased 2 of those 3 apartment buildings, and then they demolished them and built townhomes for qualified first-time homeowners in their place. And then so through the collaboration between programs such as LASER and the Los Angeles Citywide Nuisance Abatement Program, this displacement continues to occur today, but it's now under the guise of data-driven. So in this sense, right, data-driven policing does not simply entail the use of data to inform the policing of behavior that is defined as criminal or threatening, but it's also the use of data for policing the boundaries between colonizer and colonized, between property ownership and people as property, and between life and death. Laser kills, and that blood is...
I'm short. So I really appreciated Police Commissioner Dale Bronner's comments about an audit being a lagging indicator and his indictment of the audit for failing to reckon with the most fundamental questions, which were that of human and civil rights. You literally did not talk to a single person who was branded a chronic offender, and you assume that you could somehow surmise from the data problems of the police department whether or not this was a program that did not violate human and civil rights. So I want to expand on this focus of the auditors on the data problems of the police and their neglect of the civilian casualties and their failure to reckon with the fundamental task of the audit. A chronic offender is a category that we wholesale reject for its pseudoscientific and racially fraught connotations, and how an officer is preconditioned to perceive an individual is a fundamental concern for procedural justice. When you send an officer into the field with this piece of paper saying that this individual is a chronic offender, and you yourself don't even know what chronic offender means, then how do you expect that officer to not treat that piece of paper and that branding and label with added authority and enter into that encounter with heightened sense of anxiety and stress leading to violence? You are structuring officers to go into these encounters to kill people. So here's a thought experiment. There's 9 of you up there? I want each of you to define for yourself precisely and succinctly what chronic offender means. And then I want you to all agree. The fact that you cannot do that, I guarantee you, none of you cannot do that, demonstrates that this entire program is based around a concept that has absolutely no definitive value and is being utilized to structure police encounters to maximize harm on LA's most vulnerable populations.
The next speaker, Todd C. Todd C., followed by Adam Smith, Mimi Solistic, and Hamid Khan.
Who's the first one up?
Todd. Is that here? Adam Smith.
Okay.
You interrupted me last week during public comment, so you're lying about that.
I really hoped that this audit would talk about community impact in any kind of meaningful way. As someone who isn't that impacted by policing, I can't even begin to fathom how much trauma is inflicted on communities labeled gang area or high crime areas. I can't imagine having a chronic offender bulletin created on me or someone that I love that criminalizes me and turns my face into a wanted poster of sorts because of where I live, because of who I'm in community with, or whether I'm on probation or parole. I can't imagine being in the shoes of Doña Teresa or Don Jesus Romero, whose 14-year-old son Jesse was executed in a laser zone by LAPD officer Eden Medina in August 2016, just 12 days after he had executed Omar Gonzalez. 2 murders that this board, of course, found to be in policy. This audit does nothing to recognize the real human impact of sending violent officers out into communities labeled as criminal and into interactions with folks predetermined to be and labeled as criminal. Officers tasked with crime suppression driving down the street in 77th Street area supposedly saw Carnell Snell, a black teenager in the backseat of a car traveling in the opposite direction, move suspiciously. Minutes later, Officer Guillen shot and killed Carnell in the back. A murder this board, of course, found to be in policy. While Inspector General Mark Smith shows no willingness to actually look at the real impacts of these programs, the communities being criminalized see and feel these impacts every day. Laser and Predpol are successful in what they're truly meant to do, cause harm in black and brown communities. Stop legitimizing these tactics and programs by attempting to reform and change them. Dismantle these programs now and cease their use immediately.
Mimi Soltysik.
I just want to take a moment to review the collateral effects of the OIG's recommendations. In wrongly assuming that better documentation implies better policy, the OIG has deferred the question of impact assessment and surrendered it to the police themselves, the very body it has criticized for producing incomplete, compromised, and institutionally biased data. The LAPD, now accountable to itself for program assessment, where have we heard this before, will continue to translate their ad hoc informatic practices into OIG-sanctioned protocols, removing any community recourse for police abuse. The OIG legitimates and naturalizes the category of chronic offender, casually suggesting that it could be operationalized as, quote, high-risk parolees or probationers with search conditions, end quote. That this is a poorly defined, loosely designated category is no accident. It has been and continues to be a discursive strategy used to validate what the OIG itself reveals to be highly discretionary, often violent encounters with historically and structurally marginalized people. And I just wanted to say, the Police Commission and the LAPD has really shown a firm commitment toward bringing the crimes against humanity that the Palestinian peoples have suffered, the Iraqi peoples, the Afghani peoples, the Pakistani peoples, bringing them here to Los Angeles. In a sense, you're all war criminals. So shut this program down. Y'all should be ashamed of yourself.
Hamid Khan, followed by Akit Gopal, Susan Price, and Eddie H.
So what we are passing to them is a people's response to the audit. This is what people have come together.
And the people should have more than 2 minutes.
And the people should have more than 2 minutes. We asked them that we should get at least 25 minutes to respond to this thing. They refused us, so that's why we have our people's response, and we'll continue to put pressure on them. So what you're seeing is a whole spin in operation. What you're seeing is a storytelling that is being subverted and put it on the community as if we are responsible. Nobody's talking about the conspiracies. Nobody's talking about the trauma. Nobody's talking about the lives lost. And I'm talking about people sitting up on that dais over there. What we are talking about is a language that reduces people to numbers. data-driven policing. It goes back to plantation capitalism and remains plantation capitalism. People are numbers. People are statistics. We see mothers, we see families over here lamenting, wailing, appealing for justice. We see that every week, inside out, something, the trauma and murder, violence to our communities that have happened as a result of laser programs, as a result of Fred Poll, as a result of broken windows, as a result of weed and seed, as a result of suspicious activity reporting, as a result from the 1994 crime bill. And they keep on coming back. This morning there was Los Angeles Times had a report on this thing, and Soboroff ended up saying, well, this program is in the making. 10 years in the making? 10 years, and still conspiracies, disparities. Is that what you're gonna allow that to happen, Dale Bonner? Is that what we're gonna let you can continue to happen, Eileen Decker, Shane Goldsmith? Because Soboroff, I mean, he's completely not even present. The rest of you have to take charge. You can't let this continue, because the blood of the people is on you.
Akit Gopal, Susan Price, Eddie H.
Eddie H., Los Angeles Community Action Network, Stop the LAPD Spying Coalition. It was once said by James Baldwin, and I paraphrase, to be black in America is to live in a state of perpetual rage. And this righteous indignation that we're talking about is not something that was given to us. It's something that you earned. Every day, every single second, every minute, every hour, every week, every month, every year, I'm targeted as being a man of African descent. And you come back to me saying there's no such thing as bias, right? When all around me, all around this country, we see day in and day out men that look like me being shot down like animals in the street. But you come back and tell me there's no bias. All around the country, you see men and women that look like me being targeted for just living. And you come back to us and say there's no such thing as bias. You take us for a fool time and time and time again. And even when we come here to express how we feel, you bring us a bogus report, a piece of shit that if I was a teacher or professor, you would fail. You can't explain to us your own fucking findings, but you tell us there's no bias. Your findings meet your expectations. That's what they do. They don't meet the truth because you don't know the truth. You try to intellectualize because you cannot internalize the pain that we feel. But you tell us there's no bias. You continue to look at us as if we're crazy for standing up for liberation, justice, and freedom. But you tell us there's no bias. And I'll say this in closing. Silence is a language of defeat. And we will not be silenced and we will not be defeated. But what we're not going to do is shut this shit down.
There's a lot of hiding going on in this room in front of me. You all are hiding behind language. This is one of the things you said. You said, assigned to an officer to follow up. That's stalking. You said informal referral. That's somebody putting a name on a list with no other reason than because that person is black. There's a lot of hiding behind numbers. Wait, one more language thing. What the fuck is a dosage? You guys are talking as if you're the medicine and you're the disease. You're hiding behind language. You're saying this is a risk assessment. You're saying it's a point system. It's a story you're writing about people. It's a story that you're writing about people that's saying that they're inherently violent and that they need to be removed like a cancer. That's, you know what you're trying to do? It's racial profiling that you don't want to admit to us or yourselves that you're racial profiling. And place-based policing is not inherently benign. Place is a proxy for race, especially in this city, which is so segregated. And the thing is, you said it yourself. Predpol is designed to protect property. You all value property more than lives, and you patrol property, especially in developments. When we look at that map that everybody in this room has, that you all have, the place that is most patrolled in downtown LA is this quarantine zone that you're basically designing to protect the new developments right next to Skid Row, while Skid Row gets continually crammed into a smaller and smaller space. So place-based policing is inherently violent. It's harmful, and I don't even know how the people that are supposed to be advocating for any kind of change are actually just green lighting this and saying that it's benign. It's completely bullshit, and you're revealing your hand as completely in line with everybody else here. You're revealing your hand because you're saying, can bias enter into the system? There's 3 to 1 times bias disproportionate against black people already in the system.
Next speaker, please.
Okay. Susan Price. Is Susan? Audrey George, Elena, Michael Novick, and Gina Viola. Audrey George, Elena, Michael Novick, and Gina Viola.
LAPD sells predictive policing to the public as the way to ensure public safety. For who? For property owned by the wealthy? It certainly does not ensure public safety for black and brown people, ever. Your experiment into predictive policing, this experiment has killed people. You can change your language all you want, but you have already, by using language like dosage and laser and extraction and treatment, you have already exposed the way you feel about these communities. That they need to be removed, not just individually through killing, but you need to remove them from the communities they love by creating situations where the city can use nuisance abatement practices to take people out of their neighborhoods. I also so strongly object. I want you to remember that reports about predictive policing falsely seek to justify and legitimize racist predictive policing systems and practices. To this end, they inaccurately create narratives about decreases in crime by selectively choosing which months to cover and report on. These are authored by JSS. JSS is monetarily incentivized to make predictive policing seem necessary to this city in the future. They are an incentivized stakeholder. This is the very definition of conflict of interest for you to have ever involved them in creating reports about the practice of predictive policing.
Yeah, how outrageously ironic is it that basically in a data-driven policing report you claim you don't have enough data in the report to even analyze what the fuck the police are doing with it, who's managing it, how it's being implemented. The meeting that generated this report was held in the Board of Public Works, and this one should have been on April 9th, better be, because you had 24 people who couldn't even get in today. Let me tell you what this is. You once had something in LAPD that everybody called a death squad. It was SIS, where they tracked people and they waited for them to commit crimes, and then they killed them. You might remember their existence. This is the distributed and networked version of that program. There was so much outrage over it was abolished, and you're recreating it in a distributed and networked form through this so-called data-driven policing. When you had that hearing last year, you used other buzzwords. You said data-driven, evidence-based, and we said, no, all policing is supposed to be evidence-based. Evidence is clues at the crime scene. Evidence is witnesses. Evidence is not the biases and prejudices of the police officers or the record of those biases being enacted into arrest records and rap sheets. This is not evidence. And so you drop that language, I noticed this time. You just say data-driven. But that doesn't hide the fact that it's still racially biased policing that's being reified, and there's a rule of data analysis, and the rule is garbage in, garbage out.
Gina Viola, followed by Mariella.
Shut it down.
So the people did demand this audit, and you were really, really diligent in not pointing that out more strongly. I'm going to read directly from the audit. In general, given the difficulty of isolating the impact of these programs, that's the first time I've even seen that you tried. As opposed to other factors that may impact crime, the OIG cautions against drawing strong conclusions from the available statistics. What are we here for? What are we here for? What is this for? What are all 54 pages for? You said it all right there. In auditing PredPol, the OIG paints a picture that place-based policing is inherently benign. However, hotspot data obtained by the coalition exposes how communities like Skid Row are being quarantined in de facto containment zones. The OIG audits fails to expose the significant and continued relationships among the LAPD, UCLA staff, and PredPol in which crime data is used as a form of currency for services in exchange for providing proprietary technology to the LAPD free of charge. LAPD made data available to PredPol for research and product development purposes. The program is not free. We pay for it, unknowingly, with our data and with our lives. How many of you have been angry about Facebook selling your data? You get angry about that? You close down your Facebook? How would you feel if the LAPD was selling your data, your life? The OIG cites only 2 reports that purportedly evaluate PredPol, but fails to disclose that these reports were authored by the co-creators and stockholders of the program. Again, what Audrey was mentioning. You guys need to think about this. We are not interested in making tweaks to these programs to make them the best they can be. We do not believe in predictive, speculative profiling policing. We see that data, science, and tech produce the exact same results as all the other discredited methods before them. Racist, violence, banishment, and harassment. Shut it down.
The next 4 speakers, please. Mariella, Trudy, Angela, and Pastor Q, John Marie.
I want to first say good morning to everybody in the utmost from my heart gratitude for our powers that are present here today, the voices and the truths. I want to say good morning to the families that wake up with the daily pain and are rising here present. I'm so grateful for our power, the spirits that allow us to rise up and show up for so many. We are millions, we are millions, we are millions, we are millions, we are millions who are saying, shut it down. We are millions, we are millions, we are millions, we are millions who are saying, shut it down. That does mean no job for you all. That means let go of the chain from the end that you're holding it. You need to let go of the choke hold that's been so old. I haven't been here in a while, and it's sad to still see you there, Shane, playing that role. And everybody carrying a gun right here, acting like a fool. We have millions and millions and millions of people inside prison bars and cages right now. We have millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people who have been murdered on this land. Stolen lives, stolen bodies, moved by force every day. You know, arrest is violence. Did you all know that? Popo here in the room, every moment that you're exercising that badge, you are exercising violence. You know every move that you're making here. Call it pred pol, call it laser, call it fuck the community. It's violence. And I use the word fuck because it's sexually violent too. And you all gotta get that together. That means shut it down now!
Next speaker, please.
Trudy, Angela, Pastor Q.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Angela James here with LACAN and Stop LAPD Spying. And, you know, as I listen to the methods you described, of course, they're quite familiar to me. They're part of a long legacy of using methods to justify racial oppression. The racial breakdown that I heard, where you described in this report that black folks in this category of active chronic offenders at over 3 times their representation in Los Angeles. And by the way, for black women, the imbalance is even more extreme. It's unbelievable how unwilling some of us are to recognize the cost of this. Certainly, we've described the cost in terms of police shootings, but what about the enhanced stress of living under a circumstance of being hunted in your own community? I am the mother of 20-year-old sons. We live off Crenshaw. And when my sons describe for me the routine experience of being stopped for no reason, resulting in no arrests, the stress, the cost to our health, the cost to our well-being. Laser zones, from what we can tell, appear to be no accountability zones, where you can hunt us in an unfettered fashion, where you can harass us until we leave our homes and our communities. We will not allow this. It has to stop. And gentrification means you want now see as valuable a place you previously saw as invaluable.
Pastor Q from the church with our walls, Skid Row, and with Clergy and Lady United for Economic Justice. In 1982, President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, by executive order, declared we must mobilize all forces to stop the flow of drugs into this country. So they locked up tons of black folks, and 37 years later, we got mass incarceration. You've gotten insight through cell phones, videos, what we've known since the Nixon administration, the law and order rhetoric, that black folks and black communities are targeted and policed differently than everyone else. Today's laser, tomorrow is pred pol, yesterday it was broken windows and the war on drugs and Jim Crow laws. Additionally, we know that they say the law and order is a code word for black folks. Just like they say ghetto is the first thing you think of when you say ghetto, black folks and brown folks. You cannot deal with high crime unless you remedy the discriminatory policies that created these ghetto conditions. And believe me, in 241 years of European American existence in this country, these things are deeply rooted. Finally, we are not your ghetto laboratories in order to test your technology on black bodies. It is morally imperative that we understand that black bodies are not created as dispensable entities in order to keep everyone else safe. As it relates to implicit bias, that's just another code word for racist. It's just another code word for racism, and it minimizes the impact, and so you use implicit bias just like you try to make it sound good. We're not here to feel good and sound good. Our folks are dying on the street. So as it relates to these programs, in the spirit of theological abolition, we say, shut up.
The next four speakers, please. Akili, Jonathan Foster, Yvonne Michelle Autry, and Nick Napolitano.
So I should start by saying shut it down, and then just end with that. But I do want to start with reminding us, in America, there are four conditions that black people have to suffer through: white supremacy, institutional racism, individual bigotry, and mass denial. And you would know that, and you would think that they would build that in, because that exists. But it's taken 10 years, and there's no data that they can really point to why they need this. And so they want 10 more years to do it. That's why we are here to say shut it down. Shut it down. Shut it down. This is a classic example of the police state. This is what the police state does. It first identifies, spies on, criminalizes, and then arrests.
Extreme cases, Nazi Germany.
Thank you, Mr. K.
Trump. It's becoming just like Nazi Germany under Trump.
Thank you, Mr. K. And what's worst about this is that these people who are here, presumably in our name, are doing nothing about it. And so we say to you, shut this down. We don't need 10 more years of being experimented on. We don't need a minute more. You cannot prove anything you said today. You can't prove it. What you can prove...
If we get stereotyped.
Thank you so much. Listen, for these 2 minutes that I had, I share them with you. I appreciate your testimony, the points that you made, the analysis that you have done. And the most important part is the compassion and commitment you bring to justice. Shut this shit down. Shut it down. Shut it down. Shut it down. Shut it down.
Jonathan Foster, please.
Jonathan Foster. Father God, thank you for today, and Father God, thank you for your son, Jesus. Putting people in a database who have not committed a crime is an invasion of privacy. It's un-American, it's unethical, is an assumption of guilt, even potential guilt, and it has to stop, okay? And I don't think that all the police are satanic, but I have to put in a small piece of defense for the police, and the problem is they've been cast as if things are not happening to the public. That a person who did something sick to somebody yesterday is committing something sick to somebody today and is doing something sick to somebody a year from now. Hold on. Or a year later doesn't need to be addressed. I think it does need to be addressed. However, so many police programs have corrupt elements and are actually being used as a new world order targeting machines to harm whole neighborhoods, to eventually be able to turn the whole neighborhood over in LA to developers. People like Soboroff can become billionaires, who people like Soboroff and his friends, his business buddies, get to keep the wages real down low, and his landowners keep the rent real high, and it creates a false concept of elite versus the living paycheck to paycheck citizens. Okay, they're trying to live. So this laser thing is wrong. Okay, so people on this board are just a bunch of liars, and they get to falsely preside over people. But none of these people got elected to this. They just got appointed up there because they know some billionaires and some landowners, and this is Native American land. This is the Tongva land. That's correct. It's Tongva land. So what are you doing here? I'm part Choctaw. They call me white. I know I'm Scottish, but I know what happened. I don't like what happened. I don't like laser. I don't like you targeting all these black people. I was born the day Jimi Hendrix was murdered, another murdered black man. And here I'm trying to stand up for these people.
They don't care. They do not care.
Who's next?
Yvonne Michelle Autry, followed by Nick Napolitan, Michael Wilson.
Yes, I'd like to support all of my colleagues. And also Nick Napolitan, he'd like to defer his time to me. He has to leave.
Can't do that.
All right. I'm tired of being research. I'm a human being. I've been labeled a terrorist for over 20 years. Falsified suspicious activity reports, my child taken under falsified adjudications and falsified petitions just so you can experiment on me because I'm special, or for whatever future references that this data-driven engine is being used in this, it's a new world order that they're preparing for, okay, with the mind control, mass manipulation techniques that are being used. Okay, and I want to drive this home to the Jewish people because I'm not anti-Semitic. But before you were exterminated, or the attempt, it was the scholars and those that posed the greatest threat that were either contained, tortured, experimented on, and then there was a larger mobilization, and then the legalized extermination of your people. So I see this happening. Skid Row is a containment area. Skid Row is a containment area where we're being experimented on, and I live here at the Alexandria. My room is sprayed with germ warfare, germs, biological warfare. Okay, they don't know why I live. Okay, these are experiments, and we have to have this stopping. Not only the murders of our people, okay, as Angela had spoke about, the repetitious or the suspicious activity reports or the stigmas that are especially placed on black women. As a black woman who identifies as black, yeah, I'm little, but I'm still a black woman. I am not the sex goddess for you people to fuck every day and every night with your electronic weapons. And I know I'm not the only person. My neighbor is a pedophile. He's not arrested because I believe he has been commissioned to target and harass me. Okay?
Next speaker, please.
Nick Napolitano.
Next speaker, please. Thank you. Next speaker, please. We've got a lot of speakers, so if we recess, nobody else will get to speak. So do you want to? Please take your seat. If you can't take your seat, I'm going to. Okay, so this is your warning. I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting.
This is his time. We're objecting to the experimentations. Okay, yes, the targeting, the use of the electronic weapon that's causing
cancers. So I'd like to ask her, would you escort her out, please?
Heart attack. No, this
Next
is
speaker.
his time. We're speaking together.
He can speak for himself, but you can't speak for him. No, I can't. Okay, so I'm going to, then we'll just go recess into closed session unless they stop. Okay, next speaker, please.
The next speaker, Nick Napolitano, Michael Wilson, Rusty S., Adam Rice.
I'll say him again, okay?
Nick Napolitano.
Nick, are you here,
your
Nick?
time?
Okay, next.
Michael Wilson.
Mr. Wilson.
Rusty S. and Adam Rice.
Rusty S. and Adam. Sir?
I'm gonna start off by saying this. I usually address the people. I'm gonna address you all, cause your intimidation factors don't work on real people, right? Y'all been trying to kill me since I was 16 years old. Y'all told me I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna mean this, right? Cause see, just cause you got that badge and uniform on, walk past me and bump me again. That's what I'm going to say. Walk past me and bump me again. See, I'm tired of us coming up here and asking you to please value our lives. Because, see, that's us giving you value in your life while you're not giving us ours. So I'm starting to wonder if maybe we should start changing the narrative to, hey, we should start protecting our lives. They doing it anyway. We dying anyway. We dying anyway. When you dying anyway, you don't got no fear to die. I'm going to die anyway. We here for somebody that look just like me. They killing our babies. They putting little girls that's 7 years old in handcuffs because, you know, they got to calm them down. You gotta let's get real. See, there's real people in here. I know that, you know, sometimes those badges make you get blue. I've never met a blue person, but you know, y'all value them more than us. Y'all value a blue person that can't speak in this mic more so than you value all these people sitting here crying, begging you to value theirs. So therefore, I'm changing everything. I'm not going to ask you to please look into the data because you chose not to. You chose to tell us that the data isn't even effective. It isn't even correct. It isn't even intellectually sound and given morally culpable to people who have lost life. So therefore, I'm going to ask the people, start protecting your life because they won't do it. It's time for us to start protecting our life because as much as you follow me, as much as you...
Next, please. Next speaker. Thank you, Michael.
I believe it takes a very special and baffling level of moral bankruptcy to support an algorithm that essentially captures the key fundamentals of Hitler ideology. It's white supremacist software, and it is being designed to isolate the people who are already stuck in their communities and target them and use them for your profit, prison systems, legalize slavery, and anybody that supports that is just as bad as the Third Reich. Anybody that supports that is just as bad as the SS, and it will continue to just get worse and worse given the current trend among the U.S. of far-right populism, which always leads to things like final solutions. And the thing is, the word experiment was used not by these people first, it was used by you first. And you were experimenting on them, obviously without their consent. And if you do not want to be associated with the Third Reich or with, Hitler, I suggest you listen to them when they say, shut it down.
Good morning, commissioners. I stand by every fuck you've gotten this morning. And here's why. We have, how much are y'all paid? So, you have brought in analysts to do this report. Chief Moore, your office didn't even only bother to send 58 of the requested 100 reports to the Inspector General's office. When that data came back, we sat here all morning and watched you people dance around it like, well, we thought there was bias between the men and the women, and that was our concern. Why do we have to do the analysis for you? You motherfuckers ain't paying us. It's not that hard. We're not the brightest people in the world. Don't you have PhDs and shit? Okay, so here's a little analysis. Yet again, 3, 2, 1. This program targets people of color, specifically black people. Okay? Here's some more. All right? Each area adapted the laser program in its own way, which means you got every department that adapts this doing something else. This is a clusterfuck. I don't think you needed 3 analysts who apparently can't analyze shit to tell you that. You could call Stop LAPD Spying, Hamid Khan, Jamie Garcia, and everybody in this room. As a matter of fact, you don't need to because we provided you with this data for the last 10 years. And Mr. Soberoff sat there and laughed it off. When you go into closed session today to try to deny Rosario Mack's family a little justice, know that we know. And all of this houting and woofing.
Next speaker, please.
The next four speakers, General Jeff, Christine Gatson, Jed Perriott, and Mr. Herman.
Okay. So we say them again? I didn't hear.
General Jeff,
Uh-huh.
Christine Gatson, Jed Perriott, and Mr. Herman.
General Jeff.
Been a while. Just make sure you go out the right door, Jeff.
It's another topic, another time. Good morning. My name is General Jeff from Skid Row. I haven't been here about a year. It's a new chief, a couple of new commissioners. Starting off with Commissioner Bonner. Do you know they punked you out of your question that was very near and dear to this community when you asked these presenters who is actually going to provide the oversight for this program, and then you allowed the Inspector General to come and say, "Oh, I want to answer your previous question," and then it never came back. I hope you still get your damn question answered because I want to know that answer too. As far as predictive policing, like, what is this? First of all, change the damn name. You can't predict shit. Let's start there. How in the hell? What, you got a magic crystal ball? Some magic crystal ball that law enforcement somehow you're going to be able to tell who's the next kid that's going to steal a candy bar? You know what I mean? And we got him. That's absolutely asinine to be in here wasting taxpayer dollars. You know, it's a farce to all law enforcement agencies across the nation. You're supposed to be industry leaders. All this is a guise to get more money. This is a fallacy. You know, instead of trying to create money in a program to stop a kid from stealing the candy bar, why don't you come with a program to help that kid get a damn candy bar because he's hungry? He's not a criminal. That child is hungry. Y'all don't even understand. And as far as the data already exists. It's called recidivism. Start there. You already got data. So that shows this is nothing but in a capitalistic society. The LA Police Department is a capitalistic entity, and all you're trying to do is get more money. So you come up with this. And based on that report, that presentation I heard now, that's a farce. That's nothing there. So all this is you're just trying to increase your budget from $2 billion to $3 billion. And you're pushing this fluff and going to sign off this. It's not about killing people. It's about some goddamn more money. You ought to be ashamed of your damn self.
Christine Gatson.
Chief, you say that violence is not evenly distributed through this city, and so you have to use place-based data. And you say that you must rely on academia and research and talk about those things like they can't be racist as fuck. You over-police poor communities and communities where black and brown folks live, and then say it's because of you're there because of disproportionate amounts of violence. But your presence in those communities, you make those communities violent by virtue of your presence in them. And I reject the idea that certain people and places are more or inherently violent, perhaps with the exception of one group of people in Los Angeles that is most definitely disproportionately violent, and that group is the LAPD. You, Eileen, said that we needed to use resources to the best effect possible. And if that's what you really want to do, then shut down this racist, murderous department and spend however many billions of dollars you have in your budget on resourcing communities and meeting people's needs. Do you honestly think that violence and what you call crime magically materializes out of nowhere? What would this world look like if we as a society were as concerned with making sure that everyone's basic needs were met as you are with reducing crime and violence? You want to do what it says on the wall? The best way to protect and serve is to shut this shit down.
Jed Perriott.
Good morning, Jed Perriott with DSA and Stop LAPD Spying. So it's very clear when they talk about datification, they're talking about using data to continue normalizing racialized violence that is at the core of policing in America, that is at the core of the Los Angeles Police Department. And so it was asked earlier, what is the mission of Operation Laser? It's very clear what the mission is. And you listen to the words they use like extraction or weeding out, right, or cancer. How about use what you really mean? You should be saying banishment, harassment, criminalization, incarceration, and murder. For the safety of whom? Of what? Is it for the safety of the black community? Is it for the safety of community members like Carnell Snell and Keith Bursey? No, it's very clear. It's for the safety of wealthier, whiter Los Angelinos. It's to make them feel more comfortable moving into. It's to make them feel more comfortable colonizing neighborhoods that have been neglected for so long by our resources. Most of our resources in our city go to the LAPD and programs like this, so that developers can come in and continue making money and profiting, right? It's for gentrification. That's what this is all about. It's displacement, colonization, gentrification, and you're continuing to normalize it and using programs, and we're seeing through the bullshit. The community is going to continue rising up. We are going to rise until it is completely abolished, right? What do we say to predictive policing? What do we say to Operation Laser? What do we say to the Los Angeles Police Department?
The truth has spoken. Your constituents are on an uprise of civil disobedience to control the element of white people like me, to prevent us millionaires from stealing from the so-called data of Mr. Samuel and that of Miss, is it Camille? Yes, Camille. Such a great report. But you see, I don't have to do the research. The people have spoken in their outcry. Why do you bring such lies before the people who pay your bills and put you behind the white picket fence like me? Now you understand the illicit rating of data, how programmatic you've created a hostility in our communities by misleading all of us through the gentrification and hopelessness that we believe in one hope, one nation, and fuck America? No. We are America. We are going to stand for our civil rights. Brown Act, Bain Act, and every California title constitutional protection that we have. And we're going to take it to you, Mr. Inspector General. Fear the dark night. Fear the dark night. For the rise of the civil disobedience is coming. And we shall shut down this Gotham of LA and become the new Antichrist. Hail Steve Soberoff. Hail Steve Soberoff.
We have a motion for approval of the Inspector General's report. No, we're not. I don't think we're holding. I think we're just. Are we holding the Inspector General's report?
You're voting in 2 weeks.
I thought we were holding.
Mr. President, what I would suggest you do is you continue the item for the department's report back on April 9th. At that time, you can approve the department's report, the Inspector General's report or whatever your action would be. Also entertain whatever action the department recommends.
Okay, we'll do that. Let's go to item number 2B. We're going to go to item number 2B.
You need a motion to continue the item.
A motion to continue? All in favor? Aye. Okay. Yeah, okay. You can talk during public comment, but not now. Thanks.
How do I do this?
Okay, item number 2B.
Mr. President, it'll take just a moment for Commander Choi and his staff to enter the room. They were out of the room. If you'll give them just a couple of minutes.
Let me go get Ernie. Go ahead and go to the restroom.
Okay. If,
Okay.
Questions on this one? Okay. So we're going to go right to them.
Man, hello.
What's that?
Mr. President, I would suggest that you take public comment at least until the commander is ready to present.
So let's start with public comment. Yeah, we've got the cards in order. Thank you. Go ahead.
Give her just a moment.
Okay.
So here's public comment, right? 4.
Then we'll go back to 2B. We'll go back to the chief report. Yes, give it a second while we're all here. Sure. Thank you.
Mr. President, I don't have the specific cards. I don't know the name, but if you would allow the Mack family to come forward and speak, then I would.
Hello, my name is Catherine Walker, and I'm the mother of Grishario Mack. I would like to read this to you from this Bible. It said, "Hear me, my God, as I voice my complaint. Protect my life from the threat of the enemy. Hide me from the conspiracy of the wicked, from the plots of the evildoers. They sharpen their tongues like swords, and they aim cruel words like deadly arrows. They shoot from their ambush at the innocent. They shoot suddenly without fear. Without fear. Don't you people know that when you kill a mother's child, that you killed the whole family? Facts. I am the head of my family. A lot of times I have to go and hide my feelings inside so that my children don't see me break down and cry and lose my mind. Because every time I look around, I feel the feeling of my son, the presence of my son. My son was a believer. He believed in God. He believed in God. He gave his life to God. Yes, he may have did some things in life, but he gave his life to God in the end. He wrote me, he said, "Mama, I read a lot of storybooks." He said, "But the greatest book I discovered was the Bible." He said, "I've given myself to God." My baby came home 5 days. I seen him one day in 5 days. And within 5 days, your police department killed him. But guess what? You may not get judged here, but you got to answer to the man above. Who gave those police officers the right to take the life of my baby, to take my baby's life? Because guess what? Guess what? He said, "Thou shalt not kill." So you mean to tell me everybody's here is not honoring the word of what he's saying? You got that up there, but are you honoring his word? You're not honoring his word. So when you go to judge my baby, I'm trying to humble myself as much as I possibly can. I'm trying to be that mother that's trying to be strong for my children. I'm trying to be strong for the other people. May God be with all of you. May God be with all you. May God bless you. Okay.
My name is Ariana. I'm Grishario Mack's little sister. You guys don't know what y'all did to my family. I don't know how you guys eat and sleep. I can't even eat or sleep right since you guys have murdered my brother, murdered him. I can't even go to the mall that I used to go to because you motherfuckers killed my brother. I used to go there for a pretzel and a smoothie. I have yet to drive past that motherfucker because it gives me fucking goosebumps. It turns my fucking stomach at night. You know what? Maybe about a month ago, it was just me driving down Vermont, which is I guess you could say a ghetto neighborhood, which I live in. I'm just driving down the street, and my daughter is asleep in the back seat. I see the cops behind me. They say, "Pull over." I'm like, "What?" Okay. I got my license, my registration is up to date, so what the fuck could they be possibly pulling me over for? So I pull over. They say, roll down your back windows. I roll them down. Roll down your front windows. I roll them down. They come to my car with their guns drawn. Say, oh, I'm sorry, miss. It's just you and your daughter in here. Oh, she's sleeping. I said, so what was the purpose of you stopping me? Oh, it was a misunderstanding. But you got your guns drawn. But your guns are drawn for what? And you have no explanation. And my daughter, I thank God that my daughter was asleep. My daughter fucking hate the police. At the age of 5, she hates the silent, you motherfuckers. And I hate that my baby feel like that. Because we don't even feel safe with you motherfuckers. We don't know if you protect and serve what? Protect and serve what?
I lost my glasses, so I have to look close at this paper. And I just want to thank all the civil rights activists in here with us, even Adam's daughter, his little daughter, who's been on the front line with us. This laser is sort of like that movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise, where you could predict who was going to do a crime in the future. And he was one of the enforcers, but you know what? It turned on him, and they turned on him. They got after him. But anyway, this is about my son. My son, it was on Monday, April the 10th, 2018, a day that I will never, ever forget, and it would haunt me for the rest of my life, me and my family. For some unexplained reason, my son, Grishario Mack, went to the Crenshaw Mall, a mall that he never went to. From eyewitness accounts, my son seemed to be very agitated, and I guess that is why he was carrying a kitchen knife on his person. Once inside the Crenshaw Mall, which he never went to, I guess he became more agitated and uncomfortable, and then he brandished the knife. Once my son brandished the knife, he was accosted by mall security. They chaperoned him around the mall for about 45 minutes to an hour, trying to get him to leave. During this entire time, my son never once threatened or wielded the knife toward any customers or the mall security. One person even asked security, did they call the police? The security guard responded by saying, no, if we call the police, we know what they will do to him. It was apparent Shario was having some type of personal crisis. He was the one who needed help. The mall security had de-escalated the situation when someone else called the police. The police, when LAPD arrived, I was told they moved in on my son like the Navy SEALs moved on bin Laden. Even though my son was having some issues, the fog in his brain began to clear up as he saw all the weapons that were drawn on him. He immediately knew his life was in imminent danger. Once they shouted at Shario and he saw all those weapons drawn on him, he immediately turned and ran for his life. And that is when those men and women we hired to keep the peace and protect and serve our community began to unleash the fury of hell in the crowded Crenshaw Mall, full of men, women, and children shopping and enjoying the mall. One witness stated, and I quote, "It was like a shootout, but your son didn't have a gun." LAPD, led by two cowardly back shooters, Sergeant Ryan Lee and Officer Martin Robles, callously unleashed their murderous rampage upon my son, shooting him in the back like the cowards they are numerous times. Bam! They shot him in his lower left buttocks. Bam! They shot him again in the back near his left rib cage. Bam! They shot him again in his left tricep. Bam! They shot him again in the back of his left forearm. Bam! They shot him yet again in his leg. Bam! Another damn bullet ricocheted around the other patients and skinned him in the head. Hold on. I'm not through. Hold on. That's when my son. Hey. Let me finish, please. I'm stating facts so they can go back here and deliberate.
They not gonna deliver nothing, Bob.
Please be quiet.
Don't give a fuck.
be quiet. That's when my son, Phil, please be quiet so they can hear this. They got to go talk about it. Please. Calm my family down, please. I got to finish, please. Hey, okay, I'm going to finish. I know you got to go talk about this. That's when my son fell to the ground. The knife. So whoever was thinking if he had a knife or not had a knife. After that last shot in the leg, I named 6 shots already. My son, the knife fell out of his hand. My son lay there face down in a pool of blood. But my son was still alive. None of those wounds were life-threatening. By the grace of God, Shario still had a chance at life. He still had a chance to see his 2 beautiful daughters again. One who just celebrated her 10th birthday last week at her father's grave site. He still had a chance to see the rest of his family. But no, as if that wasn't enough, as my son lay there face down, only armed now with his beautiful blackness and still life in his body, one of your very own, to protect and serve LAPD officers, took it upon himself to become my son's judge, jury, and executioner, and walked over to my son at point blank range and fired the death blow into the middle of Grishario's back in front of all those horrified men, women, and children in the Crenshaw Mall. And my son took his very last breath. As he took his last breath, a female officer walked over and kicked his now lifeless body as if he were a dead dog. In closing, I ask this commission, is this truly the policies of the Los Angeles Police Department?
Thank you. I think we're going to go back to Mr. T-Fan. Can we go back to 2B and then finish? Okay, we're going to go back to item number 2B on the homeless report.
This is what you condone. This trauma is what you condone.
Break one thing, okay.
I tried to come here today.
Mr. President, I suggest you take a short recess so the family can leave.
So we're going to take a 5-minute recess so the family
His mother needs to talk
so the family can leave.
Please. Keep talking, sis.
I come in peace, sir. I come in, if any of your parents out there,
Let's give
if
the
any
mother
of you
a
out
chance
there
to speak.
parents on this
Why don't you sit down and we'll let the mother speak? If you don't sit down, we won't let her speak.
Family, Sister Cat is going to speak now. Sister Cat needs to speak, and we need you to listen.
That's fine. Let's give her
I
some
want
respect,
everybody
please.
to know that sits here on that panel. If you're a parent, if you're a sister, if you're a brother, and you've lost anyone that's close to you. My daughter once wore a badge. My 2 daughters still wear a badge. And every day they go and they wear this badge and they got to protect and serve. But yet you took their brother. But despite y'all taking their brother, they're still working their jobs. Because you know what? They got a praying mother. That's right. And the Lord has spoke to me and told me. He said, write down your vision. He said, write down your vision in the back of 2. He said, write down your vision so he that read it may run when they read the vision. He said, because the vision is for an appointed time. And my vision is justice for my son, Grishario Mack. So when you go in to make the ruling on my baby, may God be with you. Ask God to guide you and lead you so that you may not make the mistake of condemning an innocent man and condemning his family for the rest of my life. Whatever it may be, I don't know what it is. But every day I got to get up and ask God, Lord, lead me. guide me, show me, heal me, because I'm the head of my family. I got to be the peacemaker. I got to be. But I only pray that when y'all go in there and make the decision on my baby's life, just know in the final moments, before you make that decision, call upon the Lord. Because if you make the wrong one, then who will have to live with it will be all of y'all. So peace be with you.
Thank you.
Peace be with all of you. Say, Gasharia Mack. Gasharia Mack. Gasharia Mack. Gasharia Mack.
My name is Crystal. I have known Grishario for a long time. He called me mother. He called me his mom. Him and my sons were very, very close. I watched him grow up into this wonderful, beautiful, smart, beautiful man. And for him to be killed like that, for no reason. He was in trouble. He needed help. That big old sign over there says to protect and serve. Nobody protected him. Nobody served him. That sign should say to kill and get away with. I am so tired of the police killing our babies for no reason. He needed help. He had a kitchen knife. 7 days after he was murdered, a white man had a machete. He was wielding it at the police and everybody around him. They tased him. He's still alive. One day after that, a Latino man in Gardena on Vermont and Redondo Beach, over there by Gardena Memorial Hospital, was in the middle of the street with a kitchen knife, just like the one Shario had. They tased him. It didn't work. Guess what they did? They shot him in the hand. He's still alive. Why couldn't somebody do that with Shario? Why couldn't somebody take the time to just pay attention? He wasn't wielding nothing at nobody. But I have one question for you guys. Just one question. Just one question. I would really like to know, and I'm not prejudiced in any kind of way. I trust God. I love God. But I have one question for you guys. If the 450 plus people that the LAPD have killed were white, would they be in policy?
I want to say, you know, even after all this, I still love my black ass life. I wouldn't want to be any other race. I love my black ass life. Y'all would never make me hate where I came from. It's just.
I just want to say to the family of Mr. Mack, I'm so deeply sorry for your loss. I cannot imagine how it feels.
We're going to recess. Hold on. We're going to recess to close session, then come back and complete the meeting, but we're going to go do the adjudication now.
You can show with your behavior and your decision that you're sorry. You do what is right by this family. Do what is right by this family. You've stolen this mother and father's dreams. Do what's right by this family. Listen to the voice of this mother and father. Do what's right. Do what's right and make a different decision. How can it be possible that murder is in policy?
Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item number 5A1 in accordance to Government Code 54957. Commissioners.
I don't know if they're coming back in. We'll find out. It's a good point.
We've already talked to the family outside.
Are the family coming back in? Yeah, I don't think so. Okay. Okay. Okay, well, let's give it a second if they want to come back in. Okay.
Coming back. Who's is anybody recording any of this? Yes.
We got it too, Jeff. That thing works.
We don't trust you. You put up two audios to one meeting.
Are we back in session?
No, we haven't called it in.
So let's go back into session.
Okay. The Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session. We are back in open session. In closed session, item number 5A1 was discussed, and this item was continued to March 12, 2019. And relative to the open session items, item number 2B was continued to March 12, 2019. Mr. President, is there a motion to adjourn?
That correction to those dates, it's March 19th. Today
March
is March
19th,
12th.
I apologize.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn? We have a second? Second? All those in favor? We had already.
You can't do that. Brown Act, Bagley King.
Okay.
We got you.
All those in favor? Aye, thank you. Meeting adjourned.
We got you.
Hi, I'm Shannon Lamert Park. You're watching LA City View, Channel 35, our city, our channel.
Hi, my name is Caitlin. Welcome to the Eagle Rock Library. Today we are reading Is Everyone Ready for Fun by Jan Thomas. We are also reading Groovy